Alright, we got a lot of teams and not a lot of time. So here's how we're going to do this. I've picked out some of the roster moves that are most interesting to me, and I'm going to talk about the team before and after this move, and how I think it'll work out. And I'll ultimately give each of these moves a grade, based on the quality of the player that they picked up, how well it fits their playstyle, and my own subjective opinion. Alright, let's get into it. When I first heard about this roster move, I was honestly a bit underwhelmed. Not because I think Radosin's a bad player or anything, but Vitality have established a trend of bringing in big names for their roster moves. When they dropped Freaky, they brought in the biggest European rookie ever at that time, in Scrub Killer. And when they dropped Pashy, they brought in the biggest name in the world period, in K-Dop. And finally when they dropped Scrub, they brought in Alpha, who many people thought of as the best player in Europe. Radosin is a great player, but when you compare Vitality bringing him in to the other names I just mentioned, there's a clear lack of star power with this acquisition. But at the same time, RLCS isn't a popularity contest, and just because Radosin isn't as big of a name as some of those other players, that doesn't say anything about his playing ability and whether or not he can help this team win. And as far as his actual playing ability, he looks like he's going to be a good fit. He has stood out as the best player on his previous roster ever since they came together during RLCSX. He has shown great passing ability, being top 5 in assists during that season, but his assists have dropped down a bit this season, with the team as a whole struggling to find their offensive footing. And he also makes a lot of saves, being top 5 in RLCSX at that stat as well, and increasing his saves so far this season. To me, this great passing and a lot of backline defense sounds like a great support player. Fairy Peak has been playing more of a supportive role for Vitality for a while now, but his style of support looks a little bit different from Radosin's, mostly by playing more midfield defense than goal line defense. But regardless, I think that Radosin will prove to be an upgrade for this team. But at the same time, a new supportive player isn't going to be what takes this team back to the top. And as much as I hate to say it, if that ends up being the case, then I wouldn't be surprised to see one more move after the end of the season, where they find that last star player to go alongside Alpha and Radosin. But K-Dop is one of the GOATs for a reason, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he proves me wrong. But regardless of how this last split goes, I think that Radosin is going to stick around on this roster for a while, and I'll give it a B. Also, a bonus grade for picking up Fair as coach, which I'm giving an A+. For pretty much his whole career, Fair has been recognized as one of RLCS's smartest players, and being able to use that knowledge in a coaching position will help out Vitality a lot. After getting pretty much all of my thoughts out about this team in my Dr. Buttery video, I didn't expect to be talking about them again so soon. But they decided to make Turbo the sub and move Illusion into the starting lineup, so let's talk about them again. This is honestly a pretty convenient change, because what Turbo did for Team Envy is pretty much what Illusion did for FaZe, at least defensively. They both fit into the disruptor role of challenging early and letting their teammates rotate back, which is shown in their low save totals and their low amount of time in the defensive third. But one thing that I didn't mention in my Dr. Buttery video, which I probably should have in hindsight, is that when Turbo challenges the ball early, he's pretty often slow to the point of attack, and he gets beat more than you'd like him to. But on offense, they're a little more different. Neither one of them would keep the ball for very long when they got it, but Illusion was more of a passer when he got possession, looking to get the ball to his superstar teammates AJ and First Killer, while Turbo was more of a shooter, setting up in the middle of the field to take advantage of passes that his teammates would give him and take shots on goal. But all things considered, they're pretty similar players. So in order to judge this roster move, all you really need to do is decide who you think is the better player out of the two. And, I guess I'll go with Illusion? It's kinda hard to say, but I'll give him the nod, because I can remember a few plays off the top of my head where Illusion scored a really good looking goal or made a great play with a pass, but I can't really remember the last time that Turbo made a play that wowed me. So I think that's a fair tiebreaker. One thing that I really don't like about this move though, is how it could potentially affect Drees. In my video on Envy, I talked about how Drees and Turbo had started to find their rhythm with each other towards the end of the split. Drees was doing a great job of controlling the play when he had the ball, and would use that control to find Turbo in his usual shooting positions to score goals. I wonder if Illusion's going to be able to slide into that same role as the shooter to help facilitate Drees' continued growth as a playmaker, or if Drees is going to have to make yet another adjustment for a new team environment, but I guess only time will tell. I see this as mostly a lateral move. They don't get worse, but I don't think they get much better either. And honestly, this change feels kind of unnecessary to me. If they were picking up another potential star, then sure, go for it. But I don't see this as a move that's worth the roster change, so I'll give it a C. There have been some surprising moves this transfer window, but this might be the one that caught me most off guard. Even though they failed to qualify for the first regional of the winter split, they quickly turned it around and made it to the top 6 and top 8 of the next 2 regionals. When they brought in CRR, I talked about how important he would be in providing ball pressure for a team that previously had none. And he provided that pressure perfectly, basically single-handedly fixing this team's biggest issue, while also bringing a huge boost to the team's offense in general. Things were looking up for them, and I was expecting them to keep this roster going into the spring split and try to build on that positive momentum. But instead, They must have seen how well pressuring the ball is working for CRR, and figured that they might as well bring in another guy who does the exact same thing in Dorito. This move also brings the two Spanish stars of White Demons back together. Their team in last season's spring split had some good results, making it to the top 8 and top 4 in 2 different regionals, showing some real quality. On that team, CRR and Dorito were backed up by Tigre, but now they're backed up by Devo. And I think that most people would agree that that's a pretty clear upgrade. The only question left to answer now is if this potential improvement is better than the improvement that this team was already showing heading into the spring split. I'm usually not a fan of making a roster move while the team is showing clear growth, but at the same time, I can see the potential of what they're trying to put together here. So I'll give it a B-? Yeah, sure, B-. Why not? There hasn't been a team that I was more wrong about this season than Xset in regards to what I thought their playstyle would be and what it actually was. On paper, I was really excited about what this team could do. You had Hoxer and J-Pow, the two mainstays for the roster, who were both really good in possession of the ball, especially with their passing, while operating with 2 different playstyles on the ball. Then they brought in Percy, who was a phenomenal shooter and served as the backline for his old team, Alpine. The team now known as Torrent was, and still is, very, very defensive, getting nearly all of their goals off the counterattack. After Alpine would defend for as long as they'd have to, once they cleared the ball, Magic Bear and Jordan would chase after it to initiate the attack, while Percy would hang out behind them, serving as a safety valve for the defense in case the ball came right back to their side, or acting as the finisher for the offensive possessions with a shot if his teammates were able to create an opening in their counterattack. And for his move to Xset, with 2 passers as good as Hoxer and J-Pow, I was really excited about them adding a player like Percy, who could be the same safety valve and shooter that he was for his last team, while his teammates set him up with great passes. Then the season started, and literally none of that happened. Instead of being the patient, opportunistic shooter that he was last season, Percy was moving around way faster, being way more aggressive, and spending way more time on the ball. And the main thing I was wondering was why my prediction was so off. So I decided to look back at Season X and see if there was anything I missed. And as it turned out, while Hoxer was great on the ball, he was also way more passive than I gave him credit for, being far away from the ball more often than I realized. And with Percy lurking around for a shot, this pushed Hoxer into being one of the most defensive players in the region. Well, now it's going to get really fun for this team, because they're replacing Hoxer with Rapid, who's one of the fastest, most aggressive, and frankly most chaotic players that North America has to offer. Somebody is going to have to spend more time in the defensive third to replace the void that Hoxer leaves, and I doubt that it's going to be Rapid. I think it would serve Xset and Percy well for him to be the one to spend that time back there, so he can go back to the playstyle of finishing off plays that his teammates set up for him, instead of trying to set up chances himself. For the grade, I'm kind of scared about this one honestly, because I can easily see it blowing up in my face either way. But with that said, I'll give it a B+. I honestly rate Rapid and Hoxer about the same, but I can see Rapid forcing this team, and especially Percy, into the playstyle that I think they should have had all season. And if he does, and it works, then this team is going to be really, really good. Now taking a look at the other side of this roster move, with Hoxer leaving Xset, he's gone to Ghost to team up with Shock and Lion Blaze, bringing back the Shoxer duo that qualified for WSOE with Mist as their other player. Ghost have had a really balanced offensive attack, with all 3 players being separated by only 0.02 goals per game this season. But a key difference was that Rodiz wasn't quite as capable of making a play on the ball in his possession, unlike his 2 teammates. He would get dispossessed pretty easily in 1v1 scenarios, and this showed up in his especially low assist number during the winter split. But with Hoxer coming in to replace him, I think that this team will be able to find the perfect balance on offense that they're looking for. Plus, Shock tends to position himself downfield a bit more than his teammates, so with another capable passer on his team, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see his goal scoring take a significant increase in the spring split. I don't really have much more to say about this move. They're a good team, and I think that this change moves them to being neck and neck with Oxygen, as the 2 teams with the best chance of making an upset run into qualifying for the spring major. Although I don't even know if you'd be able to call it an upset for Oxygen at this point because they're just good. But regardless, Ghost get an A-. Let's give some love to South America real quick and talk about the roster move that intrigues me the most, with Era Eternity's roster replacing Snip with Loss from Chromax. And also, this team parted ways with Era Eternity and were picked up by an NFT organization called the Stoner Ape Club. And no, I do not want to talk about it. When I first heard about this move, I thought that it was a bad thing. After the fall split, they were forced into a roster move when Math left for the future Team Secret, despite qualifying for the major, and they picked up KV1 in his place. Then they finished 3rd in the winter split, just missing out on the major, and were again making a roster move. I assumed it was the same negative trend until I took a look at Lost. This guy is kinda correct. He's averaging 0.89 goals per game and 0.69 assists per game so far this season. Plus, in the fall split, he led the region in goals per game at 1.07 per game, but in the winter split, he averaged 0.84 assists, which is more than any South American player had in the fall split. And what makes this even more impressive is that he got these stats while playing for a different team in each split. I couldn't tell you anything about the playstyle of the teams that he was on, but the fact that he was able to go to the best scorer to the best passer in the region in no time at all on 2 different teams is insanely impressive. So combined with the 2 young talents in Astromic and KV1, I think that this team is going to be great. Snip is a really good player, and I think that he'll do fine on the new Elevate roster. But from the outside looking in, Lost seems like he can take Air Eternity to a new level. Sorry, the Stoner Ape Club to a new level. A-. Do you guys remember my last roster moves video, where I spent basically the entire section on OCE complaining about how teams weren't picking up Hawk? Well, it seems like my prayers have been answered, because Hawk has gotten picked up by the 4th place team in the region in Direwolves, creating an absolutely terrifying fight in the top 4 of OCE for those 2 spots at the Spring Major in London. This kid is a scoring machine. He led OCE in goals per game in the fall split at 1.05 per game, and he finished 6th in shooting percentage at 29.82. And he managed to increase both of these numbers in the winter split. He's a pure scorer, and I'm always going to be partial to the player that knows how to get buckets. With this move, he teams up with 2 players who have proven to be just as effective with the ball in Misty and Fiber. Misty has been an especially effective passer during the winter split, as he dramatically increased his assists as the season has gone on. And he should get plenty of opportunities to find teammates for shooting chances. Because while Hawk is of course a great shooter, Fiber has been increasing his scoring production in a similar trend to Misty's assists, which isn't a coincidence at all, with both players' performance propping up the other. And in the winter split, Fiber had a scoring output that was right there with Hawk. With 2 great scorers in Hawk and Fiber, and Misty holding down the fort behind them with his pinpoint passing, this team has a 3-headed monster on offense, which is quickly becoming a necessity if you want to contend for a top spot in OCE. I have nothing but love for Walcott, but this is a definite upgrade and an easy A. Seiko leaves some really big shoes to fill, but luckily for Endpoint, Archie has some pretty big feet. Okay, that analogy is kind of weird, but the point is that Archie is really good, and I don't think Endpoint will fall off too much despite losing a player as good as Seiko. Ever since his debut at the beginning of RLCS X, Archie has been one of the best players in the region with his consistent highlight plays, great statistical output, and leading his team to many great placements in the tournaments. But in the last split, Archie had his lowest octane rating out of any RLCS split so far in his career, and he also had the lowest team placement with Semper Esports finishing all the way down to 12th place. It remains to be seen how long this relative slump will last for Archie, but I'm willing to bet that he's going to be back to his normal dominant self in the next split. And there might not be 2 players who would be better in helping Archie get back to his top form than relating Wave and Metz and Norris. Wave and Metz are 2 of the best passers in Europe, and they've had the stats to back up that claim since the beginning of RLCS X. While their assist totals have taken a dip in the most recent split, they were still both well above average. And as far as playstyles are concerned, Seiko and Archie are very similar players. They were close to each other in goals, assists, shots, time in the high air, time in the offensive third, and time as farthest forward. They're both young, hyper-mechanical players who do a lot of damage with the ball and spearhead their team's offensive attack. I did find a couple of differences though, with the main ones being their number of saves and the amount of boosts stolen, with Archie being well ahead of Seiko in both. I thought this was interesting, because I would expect the player that spends more of his time downfield stealing boosts to spend less time in his own net saving shots. But Archie is constantly running back and forth between these 2 positions, doing both. This means that Archie spends very little time in the midfield, but with Metz and Norris and his great midfield defense, which I talked about in my video on Team Endpoint, I think that these playstyles will actually mesh really well together. So to summarize, Endpoint's going to be just fine with Archie, and I don't think the team playstyle changes at all. And the only question is if Archie breaks his mini slump that he experienced in the winter split to get back to top form. If he does, then I think Endpoint makes it to the Spring Major. And also, they literally could not have done a better job in finding a replacement for Seiko out of all the choices they had. So, this move also gets an A. If you watched my last Dr. Buttery video on Team Envy, then you might remember that at the end, I said that Karmine Corp was going to be the next patient on my list. But when it was announced that this team was going to make a roster change, I figured that I'd switch up that plan and address them here instead. But when I was researching this team, the main thing that stood out to me was how close Itachi and Astral are to the ball so often. They're both great when they have possession, and they're both great passers. But with both of them wanting to be the playmaker so often, they can sometimes step on each other's toes. To give you an idea of how close both players would be to the ball, in the fall split, Itachi and Astral were 1st and 2nd in the region in closest average distance to the ball, and the gap down to Fairy Peak in 3rd place was huge. And while they both got a little bit farther from the ball in the winter split, the distance they had still would have been close enough to be top 2 in the region for the fall split. With both of them being so close to the ball so often, If they lost possession, they would often get caught in a position where neither Astral or Itachi would be able to rotate back and help out on defense, which would leave Steak out to dry. And while Steak wasn't as ball chasey as his two teammates, he was still 19th in being closest to the ball during the fall split, and got even closer during the winter. So sometimes, if Steak was left out to dry, he wouldn't even be back there. So this playstyle caused Karmine to surrender a lot of easy open goals to their opponents. But despite their redundant playstyles sometimes causing problems for the team, it's fair to say that Itachi and Astral were still the two best players. So the team's best chance at success involves building around these two. So if you're looking for a new teammate to pair up with two ball chasers, it only makes sense to get somebody who doesn't spend nearly as much time around the ball in order to maximize the team spacing. And there may not be a player who fits that description better than Nali. He has always positioned himself far away from the ball, waiting patiently for his opportunity to come in and take possession without compromising his defensive positioning. But being far away from the ball like this also benefits the team spacing, making passing lanes more open, and allowing Astral and Itachi to use their great passing to get Noli the ball and great scoring chances. The issues with overcommitting on offense that this team has had so far this season is likely to still be there with Astral and Itachi until proven otherwise, but I think Nali is the perfect player to at least mitigate these issues. Plus, I still think that Nali is a really good player overall. So I'll give this an A-. This section is going to have two parts to it, because while Heroic has the organization behind them and the RLCS points, I'm honestly much more interested in the other side of this roster move. So starting with Heroic, I wasn't a big fan of their last roster move when they replaced Tho for Yukio, and my fears came to fruition with the team failing to make it to a single regional last split. So with Oli departing this time, Heroic were in search of a new third to replace him, and in picking up the relatively unknown Noasaki, they have officially completed the Season 8 Dignitas cycle. Back before the start of that season, Violent Panda, Yukio, and Coach Verge were looking for a third player to round out the roster, and they went with Astral, who at the time was a relatively unknown player by many people in the community. He had been a sub for TSM the season before, but most people didn't know what to expect out of him. As it turned out, he was a beast, and he helped lead Dignitas back to the top of Europe over the next 2 seasons. So now the stage is set for Noasaki to have a similar impact and help bring Yukio and Panda to those heights that they haven't seen since. Will he be able to do it? I have no idea, because I have basically zero information on this guy and his playstyle. But I trust this team's ability to scout and to cultivate young talent, so I'll go ahead and give this grade a C+, with the caveat that I have zero confidence in it. As for the two players that they've replaced so far this season, Tho and Oli are getting back together, bringing back my favorite nickname for a duo in Tholi, and they're teaming up with Mike Boy as their new third in place of Violent Panda, forming the team currently known as Suhhh. Tholi were the offensive force behind that Flying Dutchman team that performed well enough to get picked up by Heroic in the first place. They were both speedy and aggressive when they had the ball, and they did well to set each other up with good passes so the other one could come in and take the shot. I think that these two will pick up right where they left off in the fall and spearhead a solid offense. So the only question is how Mike Boy will fit into the lineup and what he'll be able to bring to the team. His stats so far this season show a pretty interesting trend. He had the most shots on the former team, Rick's GG, but he also had the lowest shooting percentage, converting on only 16.67 of his shots so far this season. He also had the furthest distance from the ball in that team, the fastest average speed, and the most time in the offensive third. To me, this sounds like the stat profile of an offensive disruptor. He's very involved on the offensive side of the field, but not much of that involvement includes him having the ball. Combine this player with the offensive duo Tholi, and you have a team that'll probably be volatile. But honestly, when you have 2/3 of the team that used to go by Dutch Bim Bam back in the day, I wouldn't expect any less. I'm cautiously optimistic about this team, and I think that they'll qualify for at least a couple regionals, so I'll go ahead and give them a B. Well, they actually did it. One of the most dominant rosters of all time have now split up before they even get a chance to cement their legacy with a world championship. And you know what? I'm not even mad about it, because I completely understand. Mark Bayet is a great player, and he's been a huge reason for BDS's success during their time together. But regardless of how good Mark has been, if you have a chance to pick up Seiko, you don't let that chance go. Well, you usually don't let that chance go. Seiko is one of the best players in the region, and pairing him up with Monkey Moon, who I'd say is the top player in the region, alongside another top tier player in Extra, BDS look ready to reclaim their spot as Europe's best team, and maybe even the world's best team. But with his new star-studded roster, things are going to look a little different for them this split, especially on defense, and I'm curious about how they'll adjust to such a dramatic playstyle shift. If you haven't heard me talk about BDS before, then first of all, hi and welcome to the channel. But whenever I mention this team, I'm usually talking about how Mark Bayet is always challenging early whenever he's able to, and looking to stop the opponent's counterattack by either hitting the ball or getting a demo. This playstyle was a huge reason for BDS being so dominant on defense, and if there's one thing that they're going to miss from Mark, it'll be this. because Seiko differs from Mark in just about every way imaginable. Where Mark likes to be disruptive, Seiko will instead rotate around the play and give his teammates the chance to come in and stop the counterattack while he goes to refill his boost. This rotation style resulted in Seiko having a farther average distance from the ball without possession this season, despite Mark having the farther distance to the ball overall. Seiko would on average be nearly 300 units farther away from the ball when his team lost possession, which is a massive increase. But both defensive styles are viable, and if they're executed correctly, then it's pretty hard to pick one over the other for which is better. But it can be very problematic if you're expecting a teammate to do one of these things and they end up doing the other instead. For example, if you're expecting a teammate to stay disruptive in the play, then you might start your shadow behind them, which is something that we see a lot from Extra. But if you go into this passive shadow defense and nobody challenges the ball, then you just end up giving your opponent a lot of space with possession, giving them room to make a threatening play. On the other hand, if you expect your teammate to get out of the play and let you come in for the challenge, but they instead also early challenge, then that obviously becomes a double commit, which is of course not great. Now I say all of that to mostly express how different Extra's role is going to be on defense. Swapping teammates from the quick challenger in Mark to the wide rotator in Seiko means that Extra is probably going to look a lot different on defense than he has in the past. If I had to guess, we're probably going to see Extra do a lot more of this early challenging on defense. On the other hand, Monkey Moon has had a very similar defensive role to Seiko over the course of this season, with taking wide rotations back to goal from their offensive pushes. So it's possible that we might see some times where they're both hesitant to challenge the ball when they should, and give the opponents a little bit too much space. But with that said, I don't think we'll run into that issue too much, if at all. And if you're wondering how they'll do on offense, they'll be fine. They have Extra, Monkey Moon, and Seiko on the same team. They could probably turn off their monitors and still average 2 goals a game. But having their defense match their offense will be the difference between this team simply being great or being unbeatable. And this move is an easy A. Alright, that was a lot of teams that I just talked about right there. But there are also a lot of teams that I didn't talk about. So I'll put some extra grades on the screen now for some of the teams that I didn't cover. If you have more detailed thoughts from me about any of these teams, you can leave a comment down below, or you can join my Discord and reach out to me there, and I can probably give you more detailed explanation on my thoughts. But I'm gonna head out now, and I'll see you when I see you. Thanks for watching.